Hello and welcome. This is a webinar for Human Subjects Guidelines for Community-Based Work to ensure that our community members are protected. I'm Dr. April Schweinhart, an Associate Research Scientist at PIRE and a member of the Ohio SPIF PFS Evaluation Team. Today, we're going to discuss some of the most important and basic parts of conducting evaluations of human subjects, including the definition of research and what falls under human subjects protection, issues related to privacy and confidentiality, and how to address both of these concerns, why collecting informed consent is important, and what basic information should be included, concerns revolving around including young people in your evaluation, including a checklist for best practices, the difference between incentivizing or encouraging people to participate and coercing them, and overall, what good protocols and practices need to be followed in order to protect our community members and conduct ethical projects. Prevention is about improving the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Much of the work we do in prevention involves gathering information from people. From them, we need to know usage, perceptions of risk and harm, attitudes, levels of knowledge. In other words, we need to collect data. Whenever organizations ask individuals to provide information about themselves, certain protocols should be followed in order to protect those individuals from any harmful effects of providing that information, ensure that the individuals are being respected, and that the research is doing more good than harm. Common research protocols were established under what is known as the Common Rule, a set of regulations developed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and other agencies to prevent harm to subjects. Harmful effects include violations of privacy, undue stress, coercion, economic or personal hardship. These protocols must be followed whenever one is conducting research. But what is research? Research means a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. It includes experiments, observational studies, surveys, tests, and recordings. Universities and other research entities are required to have an institutional review board to review or declare exempt from review all proposed research and ensure that human subject guidelines are being followed. Much of the data gathered from individuals as part of the SPIF PFS is not considered research. It's not going to be published or disseminated as generalizable knowledge in journal articles or at conferences. Program evaluation data that is gathered as part of a needs assessment or planning process is usually not considered research, so it does not need to be reviewed by an institutional review board. However, any data collected from or about individuals should be gathered, analyzed, and reported using appropriate guidelines to protect human subjects. In order to do that, we should also talk about what kind of data falls under the purview of human subjects research, which we'll get into later. Tells us what is research. It's from a guideline for human subjects protection. The first question, is the activity a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge? Our answer to this question is no. Therefore, our activity is not research, so the code does not apply. If we go all the way to the bottom, we see that other federal, state, and local laws or regulations may apply to the activity. We're not aware of any, but we still need to ensure that our subjects are protected. Our primary activity is not to contribute to generalizable knowledge, it's to help our communities. If you have questions as to why this activity is not research, please refer to this resource on identifying intent. Is this project research? So what falls under human subjects protection? Human subjects means a living individual about whom you obtain either data through intervention or interaction with the individual, including human participant surveys, interviews, or focus groups, collecting data through observation, or the use of human tissues or specimens. It also includes private information about a living individual, such as observation of behavior when the individual doesn't know it, or medical or academic records that an individual can reasonably expect will not be made public. Definitions of human subjects are put in place because people assume a certain level of privacy under most circumstances, and this level of privacy and confidentiality should be maintained as much as possible. Participants should be informed of how the project will ensure privacy and confidentiality, including how you will report the data, where it will be stored, who will or will not have access to the information, and how the identity of individual participants will be kept private. Those working with participants must always be aware of these policies. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what to do when your project does not meet the requirements of research and does not need an institutional review board, because you should still protect humans as subjects. To meet the 3 ethical principles for guiding research activities, these are all things that we can relate to even though we're not conducting research, because we should always act with beneficence, justice, and respect for persons in mind. So what to do? Even though we have determined that the activities of the SPIF PFS do not constitute, we still need to collect informed consent of people who participate in our data gathering processes, such as surveys, focus groups, interviews, etc. And we still need to ensure that data are handled appropriately to ensure individual confidentiality. All organizations that collect data from human subjects or use records containing private information about individuals need to follow protocols related to informed consent and individual confidentiality. But what is informed consent? Only someone over the age of 18 can give informed consent to participate. In order for someone to give informed consent to participate, your organization is obligated to ensure that they have information, comprehension, and voluntariness. You can check the SPIF PFS website at pfs.ohio.gov for sample consent forms for both adults and consent assent forms for children. Assent forms are like agreement forms for participation. Since only someone over the age of 18 can give informed consent, children can only agree to participate. But collecting child assent is still important. As we will discuss later, involving youth in research involves the same concerns as involving adults and some additional concerns. Children should still be informed of the procedures and their rights as a participant, but you must also obtain parental consent for them to participate. In your informed consent document, you must provide information on your study. Participants should have information about the study or project in order to make an informed decision about participation. Researchers must provide certain essential points of information, such as the purpose of the research, a description of what the subject will be asked to do, who to contact if the participants have questions, any foreseeable risks of harm, benefits from the study, any compensation, or any other relevant information. Another thing to consider when creating your informed consent document is comprehension. Comprehension is the ability to understand what one is being asked to do, as well as the implications of any risk of harm associated with participating in the research. Participants should be able to comprehend the information about the study or project and their role in it. This is a function of the intelligence, rationality, maturity, and language presentation of the subject. The presentation of information must be adapted to the subject's capacity. The last thing to keep in mind is voluntariness. Voluntariness requires conditions free of coercion and undue influence. Coercion includes pressure, threat of harm, or large compensation for participating. Participants must be free to choose to participate in your research. They must also be free to end their participation for any reason without consequence. Now we're going to talk about some special considerations involved when using youth in your project or evaluation. Based on concerns for the welfare of children as research subjects, protections for children that exceed those for adults or incorporated into the federal regulations for protecting research subjects. It's important to involve young people in deciding how they will be involved in your project and to ensure their participation is not token or manipulated by adults. When working with children who are under the age of 18, it's important, as we discussed, to obtain both parental consent, since the child is a minor and therefore cannot legally give consent, and youth assent to participate. Now we're going to talk about some key ethical considerations for conducting evaluations. In reality, these apply to all populations that you would involve as participants, both children and adults, but they should especially be applied when involving youth as participants. The first thing we want to consider is avoiding harm to participants. You want to assess the risk of harm to participants through your research and plan to minimize any risk of harm. Be prepared to deal with any distress participants may express during the research process, and make arrangements for further ongoing support to individual participants who need it. Child protection is also an important consideration. Consider child protection issues in daily practice and in the recruitment of research staff. Discuss how you will handle situations where risk of serious harm to participants is disclosed. We already talked about informed consent, but just to go over again how this relates to including youth in your project, you want to ensure that all participants give their consent or assent to participate, and provide information about the research that is understandable and attractive to participants by including their rights as participants and how the data they provide will be handled. This is where it is key to ensure that you write your assent and consent documents in language that your populations can understand based on their maturity level. You want to seek the informed consent and assent of youth, ensuring that they can withdraw their consent or assent at any point. And remember that you also need to obtain parental consent, and how you request it depends on the sensitivity of the research, the potential risk involved, and your organization's policy. Lastly, you'll want to seek the support of community organizations, school, and other settings where the research will take place. Another consideration is that you want to use an inclusive approach to make sure that your methods maximize the chances of males and females participating fully, and consider how you will involve the voices of participants who face discrimination. As we already talked about, you want to make practical arrangements to protect the confidentiality of respondents. You want to consider whether there's need to offer compensation to those helping you with your project, including those youth researchers who might be participating, and in what form you would offer this fair return. You also want to consider the safety of your project staff and assess possible risks as to their safety, take steps to prevent any harm occurring to them. The last thing we want to consider is wider accountability, to ensure that you properly consult with communities in planning your research and contribute where possible to capacity building. It's important to explain the potential benefits of the research to participants, but avoid raising unrealistic expectations. And at the end of the process, bring the results of the research back to the communities which participated. This is especially important for our project. Since we talked about offering fair return for participation in our research, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between incentives and coercion. Providing incentives for participation can help you get a large enough sample, but precautions need to be taken to ensure that you are not coercing subjects into participating. Providing too great of an incentive, particularly among youth or economically disadvantaged populations, can create undue influence to participate. When working with these populations, it is important to consider the local research context, the needs of the population, and what passes for an acceptable incentive in your area. The things we've talked about today represent good practices in conducting evaluations. All public and nonprofit organizations should carefully follow established guidelines that protect human subjects even though much or all of our work is not considered research. If your organization is involved in research, meaning you plan to generalize about a larger population, publish your findings for a general audience, then it's important to collaborate with a university or research organization that has an established institutional review board and follow their procedures. It's important that all employees or project staff who are directly or indirectly dealing with data collected from individuals be trained in the appropriate human subjects protocols that we discussed today. Lastly, the final good practice that we'll go over is that if you're ever in doubt about any of these practices, just consult your friendly OSET team member with any questions you might have. Thank you for attending this webinar, and here are some references that might come in handy as you continue your work.